Welcome to the Spiritual Artist Podcast. This is Chris Miller. I invite you to join me as I interview artists from a variety of disciplines. We'll share powerful stories and lessons learned while making their art. Good morning. This is Chris Miller with the Spiritual Artist Podcast. I'm so excited today. I'm going to introduce Cheryl R. Janis. She is a fiber artist with a wellness design background. The reason I'm so excited to talk about Cheryl is in my book, The Spiritual Artist, I do talk about grounding yourself a little bit before you go to task and do your art and connecting with what I call a greater power. And Cheryl, well, she takes this really far, I think, and I'm going to enjoy talking to her because not only does she talk about it in her process of creating itself, but she goes all the way back to the materials that she's using, which I find really fascinating, and how they are made within a spiritual wellness environment. So she specializes in high texture modern weaves made with a small batch, organic, raw, and ethical fibers. So that's what's so engaging for me. Ethical fibers, what is that? Do these fibers have some sort of morality? How are they based? So good morning, Cheryl. How are you?
Good morning, Chris. I'm doing well. Thank you for having me here. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, I'm a little envious because it's a little hot in Dallas, and you were just describing that you're sitting there with a fire lit.
Yes.
Are you in Taos? Is that correct? You're in Taos?
I am. I'm in a little town called Arroyo Seco, which is just a beautiful artist town, which is literally 10 minutes from downtown Taos. And it's quite magical. It's at the foothills of the ski valley, which is the Sangre de Cristo mountain range. It's absolutely spectacular here.
I was reading about that mountain range last time I went to Santa Fe, and it's pretty amazing how very old that mountain range is.
Yes, it is quite old.
So I encourage listeners to read about that mountain range, because you'll find out that there's layers and layers of history exposed in those mountains. It's quite magical. It is quite magical.
It is really magical. They're very much alive. Yeah.
Well, everybody that follows me knows that I love New Mexico. That's like my home. And so I'm sure you love it as well.
Oh, yes. It's paradise. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else, but shh, don't tell anybody, okay? No, I'm kidding. It's truly a magical place. It's just got a really neat energy here, a really neat vibe.
Oh, I know. And the light. Yeah. I love the light.
The light is, it's quite special.
Quite special. So Cheryl, there's so many things to talk about, but I did want to start with the materials that you use, because I think that's pretty interesting.
Sure.
How is a fiber ethical? How does that work?
I was laughing when you said, do they have some kind of a morality? It's really just tracing back the origin of the actual yarn or the fiber. So for example, your listeners might know that wool is often used in clothing and in a lot of fiber arts, and it's probably the most widely used material in things. And yet a lot of people don't know that many sheep are the way that they shear the sheep. Traditionally, they use a process called museling, museling, and it's quite painful, and and I just don't want to get into it, but it's quite painful on the skin, and it has become very well known that museling is associated with kind of like torture on these animals. So, a lot of people don't really know that, who do crafts and artists and different things, but I do know that. And so for me, it wasn't only important to source wool that I use from sheep that don't have that process done to them, but I took it a step further and wanted to source it from the smaller farmers who need support and who love on their animals. So imagine you get a material that is totally clean in so many ways. And yes, it costs a little more money and it's a little more time, but the payback, the value there, and the way it feels when you touch it and all these things. It really lights up and it really makes that weave extra special and magical. And so it's part of my core values. That's one example. Another example is silk. And many people don't even know that silk comes from a live animal. It comes from a worm. And mostly they just, throw them in a pot and call it a day, and get the silkworm that way. Well, there's this thing called peace silk where it's marketed that way. And it's actually where people in other countries like India, they harvest the silk from the cocoons after the worm has finished its life cycle and left it. And so there are many sources out there. So again, not only is it ethical in that it helps the animal, but you also support the livelihood of women and children and men and in their traditional, craftsmanship. And they do that. And then you support the small businesses that actually are assisting them, that import it, and it's important to them. And then I get to use peace silk and feel absolutely free of any guilt or any bad feelings like, oh my God, how many animals were killed to make what I'm touching right now. So those are just two examples of probably the most widely used that can be harmful materials. So that's the ethical, that's the morality piece that you were.
That's amazing. I mean, it's something I had no idea.
I think a lot of people don't. But it is very popular. And so it is very popular if you look it up online and you look up, ethical or eco-friendly. Another really fun fact that I love to share. Chris, do you know what yaks are? They're these type of animals. You do? Uh-huh. Okay. So yaks are these, for those of you that don't know, they're listening, they're these large, they look like cows, but they're much shaggier, and they come from Tibet and all these regions, in the Himalayas. And anyway, the yak have this gorgeous down fur, and every year they shed it completely. Every spring, their entire body just drops it on the ground. And those people, the herdsmen and the herdswomen, they collect it off the ground, and I use that in my weaves. And so it is actually ethical by nature, and it is as soft as cashmere. So when you're using yak, and the specific yak fiber that I use is called Kula yak, because it's from the Kula region in Tibet. Uh-huh. And it's through a company called Love Fest Fibers out of San Francisco, California. And that's how I discovered it. And they talk all about that on their website. So not only do I get to do my art, I get to research and find all these really cool people who are doing amazing things in the world. So there's connecting the dots that way.
Yeah.
So anyway.
I love it. But, I talk about that in my book, that when I paint, I believe a painting is capturing my vibration of consciousness. I really do.
Right. Right.
Well, when you think about your work, if that is the case, then the fibers that you use are capturing the consciousness of how
Absolutely.
they are sourced.
How they are sourced, and who's spinning them, who's touching them, and
right.
These women who are filled with joy touching them and spinning them is going to feel much better to me than women who are in deep depression or suffering in some other emotional way, or men. And so that it just feels so good when it arrives in the box, from the place I order it from. I open it up and it's just like life. It's just its vibration is high.
Wow. And you can actually, do you feel it, or do you see it, or is it both?
Oh, both. And then it's in the weave. And then the people that buy my weaves buy them because they're those kind of people that can resonate and feel that. And that's important to them. And I mean, you know what it is. It's like that compared to things you buy at IKEA. If you go and you buy art at IKEA, it's kind of flat and lifeless, right? I mean, everyone knows that. I mean, once in a while you might find a gem or something, but so that's the difference. It's
the difference between an original piece and a print or a copy.
That's true.
I think, and I tell my artists themselves, I see a lot of people on Instagram where they're showing that they mass produce things. they're mass producing things. And I want to emphasize, no, take your time,
Yeah.
enjoy that gap, and be in that creative space where
Right.
you produce things, and they're original, one of a kind pieces. And
That's right.
that seems to be what you're doing there.
Oh, absolutely. And it's totally channeled. So we'll talk about that
Yeah. Well,
whenever.
let's talk about that. So,
Okay.
how do you get into this state? Do you do some sort of preparation before you go into the creative world?
I do. So I have a morning practice of meditation and clearing myself. So I work with, I channel higher dimensional beings. So I'm a multidimensional energy healer, and I work with my spirit guides. And so I just kind of, it's not that hard here because I just sit outside when it's not winter, or look out my windows and I have these views of the mountains, and it's just so beautiful. So it actually is a lot more helpful. But you can set up in your studio a candle or anything as simple as that, and just take 5 minutes to ground yourself, however you do, into the earth, and get into your body. So in the morning, we oftentimes we get up and we jump and we grab our phones, and then we're busy doing things and taking care of our kids or our animals or our husbands and wives or whatever. And then all of a sudden we jump, okay, now it's time to go to the studio. Or, my studio is just a little room, outside of my home, which I love outside. It's just adorable. But, so I find that when I don't sit quietly and do some kind of a body technique, like either EFT tapping or connecting to my spirit guides or just breathing or listening to music, even like
Mhm.
anything that calms you. If I don't do that, then I'm just sort of in this kind of frenetic place, and my mind starts spinning, and that affects how my weaves turn out. So I've done both ways, and so I know I've learned
It happens. I mean,
that.
that's a truth. We can create in either place, right? We can
Right.
create, but it's preferred to create from that place. You know,
Yes, it is. So,
I hear you.
yeah, so I just spend time just getting connected. I set an intention. I always set an intention before I weave, and then, like, whether it's beauty, okay, let me be a channel for beauty, or I'll call in a specific archangel that I like to work with. Like, I like to work with Metatron and his orange cloak, and I'll just connect to him, or I'll connect with the goddess Aphrodite because she's all about beauty. And it really doesn't matter if you believe in this stuff or not. It's just connecting to it. It really works. And then I kind of go over to my where all of my yarns and fibers are, and then I kind of just say, I ask for guidance, and I say, okay, show me what to do today, what colors.
Oh,
And then I just
wow.
sort of scan it. I scan the shelves, and then I just stop on what inspires me, and just like, oh, that, oh, maybe some linen, oh, maybe some hemp today. All right, okay, I've got that. Okay. And then I sit in front of my loom, which I have a huge loom that I got not too long ago, which I love. Oh my God, somebody handcrafted that, and it's gorgeous. It's made out of maple, and it's 6 feet wide by 6 feet tall.
Oh,
So I sit in front of it and I look at my weaves, and then I think about what color palette inspires me. So for example, right now, cobalt blue is really inspiring.
oh.
So I get my recycled silk out, and it's just from silk saris, from India, and that would end up in the landfill. So
Oh, so
uh,
you repurpose
I
some of your
do
fibers.
repurpose. I do repurpose fibers. I use a lot of plant-based fibers. So there are things that a lot of people don't know about, like rose. There are people that actually create the softest, most uh, unspun fibers that are white, that feel like clouds, from the rose plant, from the banana plant, from tencel, which is a wood
Really?
cellulose from trees. And these are like shiny, like white, powdery, fluffy uh, fibers that you can use in your weaves. And they're just they're magical. So I kind of look and see. So right now I'm working with cobalt blue, and I'll just see what's happening. I get my wool again from a place that Living Yarn Fibers, and they're out of Washington, and they have an Amazon store, and they certify everything that it's organic, that it's cruelty-free, that they have all these like certifications that it hasn't been processed, and just love that. So, okay, so I gather that, and then I just sit in front of it and see what comes. I don't use a pattern. I never use patterns. So I'm an intuitive weaver. I just start weaving. I just start seeing what comes through.
I had a I don't know if it was a counselor or a coach or something tell me at one time. She said to put my hands over, when I hold a brush, to put my hands over the paint and feel like a color will be, you'll feel it. So,
oh, wow.
That you'll feel a draw in your hand. And by a draw, I mean like an energy, like, okay, I'm going toward that color. So when you talk about your body, do you feel that, like, are you feeling a connection to a certain color?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So it's really wonderful because I have all these, fibers that are super ethical and high vibe. And so I get to play with those. And, some of my friends who are weavers don't use those kind of fibers because they don't want to sell their pieces. They need to sell them for less money. So they have to save money there. And I just can't do that because otherwise I just can't be in my zone or my creative place. So yes, actually, it can happen so quickly, that guidance, that you have to be really aware. That's why getting quiet first is really helpful. Otherwise, if you just go right into your art, you're like, okay, yeah, I've got to make some pieces that I can sell because we need the money. Yeah. And your mind starts going, okay, yeah, white is kind of popular right now, so I'm going to grab that. And then it just ends up being a struggle because I've been there. It ends up being a struggle, and then I end up having to unweave things like, and
I guess that would be harder with a painting. They always they tell us with painting, you just cover it up, you just paint it up. But with weaving, I suppose
it's harder. Sometimes you have to cut it out, and
you're no.
And I do, and I listen, and then it's just hard to be not influenced by others, like too, who you show something, a little bit of it too, and then they're like, yeah, exactly.
I actually I talk about that in my book. I say, don't look outside of yourself because you're going to be pulled from your center.
Yeah.
We all have an artistic center, and that's what makes everything you do original, because you're coming through what I call your creative DNA. And so many people sit there and they look at other things and they go, oh, maybe I should be like that, or what's selling right now.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what's selling right now. And
I know.
I even take it so far as, when we practice to be in the present, to not look at your old stuff either. If you look back at your old stuff and try to imitate it, have you ever done that? You're like,
it doesn't work.
It doesn't work, right?
It doesn't work. It's like you were a different person back then, even if it was last month,
Exactly. You're sitting there going, but I did this before, but going down that same path. You're right. Who you are in this moment is different from who you were just 3 days ago.
I know.
And so it is really interesting. And I tell people, you want to be creative in the now. And when you're looking for what's selling, you're trying to be in the future. And when you're looking at what you did, you're being in the past. And so I love how you talk about that intuitive space where you just sit there and listen and follow.
Yeah. And it's not always possible, right? Like I had a weave I did recently, and I showed it to someone, and they were like, I don't really like that. And then I kind of undid it, and then I was in a bad place and I didn't ground. So I finished it. I ended up throwing it in the fireplace.
Oh no.
And it felt so good.
Well, it's released.
Incredible. It was released. So I'm not perfect. I'm not saying that, but it is I'm learning more and more, and it's definitely my focus. And I'm really listening now, like now in this moment, I'm just like, okay, I'm going to listen and ground. And I feel really grateful and appreciative that I do have a connection to the subtle realms, but we all do. We all really have connection to our intuition, and our minds just get in the way.
Yeah. Oh, I think
Yeah.
so. I was listening to Eckhart Tolle this morning, and he talked
Huh?
about stepping out of your mind. And it's exactly what you were just talking about, which I really am keyed in on, is he was talking about being in your body. He said one way to get out of your mind is to project your
Yeah.
attention into
Yeah.
your body, like
Yeah.
project it into your hands and feel
I
your hands.
know. I
And
know. I
so
do
is that,
that same practice.
do
I
you?
listen to him. Yeah, I like it when he talks about to focus on the bottoms of your feet
Yeah.
and just constantly. And he says this thing that really resonated with me. He said, if you couldn't describe your feet or you couldn't see them, how would you know they're there? And then suddenly your energy goes to your feet and you're like, I can feel them. And it was just that little like tool, or he calls it, or something. And that really, but also I do it with my hands. Like when I'm in bed, my mind's kind of going, I'll just go feet, feel your feet. Okay, if I couldn't see them and I couldn't describe them to anybody, how would I know I have bottoms of my feet? How would I know
Right.
I have soles?
And
I
you
love that
project,
practice.
you project your presence in. I want to share this book that I'm reading, that's really great. Living Your Yoga. Have you heard of Judith Hanson Lassiter?
No.
Oh, anyway, this is a great book because she takes the yoga practice, and it's not about your poses. She's
Yeah.
talking about what we're talking about
Yeah.
putting your attention in your body and
Yeah.
releasing judgment and getting out of your mind. I would recommend it. I
Okay.
think you would
I'll
really
check it
like it.
out. I'll check it out.
But that's kind of the trail I'm on my right now, is how do we heal ourselves through our bodies?
Yeah.
Because I don't know about you, but I'm a taskmaster. I have a to-do list, and I'm always trying
Oh
to.
yeah. We all are. Oh my
Exactly.
God, who isn't?
I always try to do it through my mind, and I'm like, wait a minute, we can get to this through our body. And when
Mhm.
you're, and it sounds like when you're weaving, you really are in your body.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I listen to music like a lot of us do who do art, and I listen to some uh, kirtan kind of type music like Deva Premal and Mitten and a bunch of others, and I just love it, and that helps. And then I try to stop when I'm finished with a session. Sometimes I'll go, no, just 5 more minutes or something, just 5 more minutes. But I recently did an incredible commission on a weave, and I just have to share it because it was the most magical process. So I part of what I do in part of what I do with my art business is I give some of my profits to farm animal sanctuaries because
Oh,
I'm
wow.
vegan and I love farm animals. So I decided to start near home. So I just looked up New Mexico farm animal sanctuaries, and I found New Mexico Farm Sanctuary, and they're in Tijeras, which is near Albuquerque. And I just started connecting with them, and we kind of became friends. And they said they bought one of my weaves, and then they said, and then Julie Saros, one of the owners of the facility, and who she runs it with her husband and all these amazing volunteers. She said, we just had this beloved horse, Cherry, that passed. We didn't have it a Cherry for too long, and this was just this horse gave hugs and was really wise, and they were just really in grief over this loss. And so she asked if I would do a weave in honor of this
Oh,
horse.
wow.
And I'm like, well, yeah, I've never done that before.
So an
And
intuitive weave for an animal.
for an animal. So she sent me they kept the horse's tail a lot of from the mane. It was black. And so I got it, and I like it had all this pain in it, right? From the way it died. So I
Oh,
had to clear it, and I did, and I had a friend who helped me with that part because I needed to clear that. And then I brushed it out, and then I cannot believe. So Diana Cooper believes that the unicorn energy is like real angelic. It's not just a myth, and that unicorns are ascended horses and these things. So I said, okay, I'm going to channel this horse Cherry. I'm going to channel the unicorn energy, and oh my God, it was amazing. It was like somebody took my hands and wove this weave. And it was, okay, so it was like almost 4.5 feet wide by 4.5 feet tall. So it was really big because she was a big animal and she wanted a big. So
Wow.
I did this mane that was like this angelic mane out of that rose fiber I was just mentioning. And I wove in her tail as her tail. So on the weave, it was her tail. And I'd never done any of these things before. I'd never been trained to weave like real animal hair into a weave. And honestly, like in my old self, that would have totally freaked me out. Like, ew, gross. This was farthest from that. This was angelic. This was alive. And I cannot believe, and I just wove and wove and wove. And I had all kinds of doubts through it because I'm like, okay. And I wove her shape and
Wow.
her head.
Is there a picture of this on
Oh
your
yeah.
website? Well, I
It's
would.
it's on Instagram, and
Oh,
I can put it on my website, but it's on, if you want to just at the Enchanted Weave, at the
okay.
Enchanted Weave on Instagram, there's videos and the beautiful picture on the mesa. Actually,
Uh,
on the mesa is the mesa here in Taos is where all the sage, it's a very large open area outside of our home, and there's views, expansive views all around, and it's where all the sagebrush are. It's just, and it was at sunset, and we photographed it then. It was, so it, as you can imagine, that was just the most enlightened thing I have ever woven. I mean, and wow. And even when it was done, I think it took a couple of 2, 3 weeks or something like that. I mean, and I was slow and took my time. And then we went, my husband and I went and delivered it to the New Mexico Farm Sanctuary. And they were just like, I mean, tears. They were just so
oh.
moved and just lovely people. If you guys listening out there want to support a farm sanctuary, New Mexico, and you love New Mexico,
Well, it's
there's so many farm
interesting
sanctuaries. But
because
anyway.
I do love fiber art. I seem to be attracted to a lot of different fiber artists,
Oh,
even
interesting.
locally, and
Uh-huh.
so I hope that they pick up some of your techniques there. And
Yeah.
I do want to tell the listeners to check out your website because you do talk about all your sourcing and
Oh
everything
yeah, I
in
do.
detail because it's hard to
Yes.
get in an interview like this. But you just mentioned something I want to help get your help with. You
Yeah.
mentioned that. Do you consider yourself a channeler?
Yes.
Okay, so I think there's some people listening that are going to be like, "Well, what is that, and what, and how does
Okay.
it work?" So,
Yeah.
and I really want people to start learning to feel that connection. So, how would you advise someone who's pretty new? Say someone's doing art and they go, "Well, sometimes I feel connected to this, you know, power." And how would you
Yeah.
advise? How did you approach it?
Um, well, probably like you, I was always a sensitive person, even as a child. So I think some people who are empathic and considered highly sensitive, um, by that's a term, highly sensitive people, which a psychologist, I think Elaine Aron is her name, wrote a book about it. So it just means that there's a certain segment of the population that has a highly sensitized nervous system. That's the science explanation of it.
Uh-huh.
And then there are others of us who are empathic, who are always like kind of just know things, or we take on other people's energy when we're around negative people. We need a lot of
Mm.
alone time. We're kind of introverted a little bit more. That's why these online things are great, but that's another subject. So for someone who's already empathic and sensitive, you can resonate already with what I'm saying. You are like, we're part of the same tribe.
Right.
So if you're listening and you're struggling with things like depression and anxiety, which a lot of us are experiencing right now because of the COVID, because of this whole presidential craziness of the world and the divisive energy, then I would just get help with that first, and really be moving through it. Right now there's just so much stuff up to be cleared, so I would just recommend, and I offer energy work as well. That's
Oh.
a whole other subject. I do healing, but for me, I went through a dark night of the soul time. I don't know if you've gone through that, Chris, where it's like your whole world comes crushing down. You feel like a black cloud has engulfed you, and you're just like unwell for a long period of time. Like mine would last 2 years before I kind of finally came out of it. But for me, I've always been sensitive, but through that time, I was able to clear so many things that I became connected to other beings in other dimensions who are helping me. And so I just developed that. I started working with a teacher, I started working with a mentor to
Oh,
develop that
that's
stuff.
interesting. I
So
didn't know. See,
yeah,
I never heard of that. You get a mentor in this. This is great.
you find someone. I think when any of us are going through like any kind of physical pain or emotional trauma, and we're either looking for a therapist or we're looking for a healer, an alternative healer, and that could take a while until you find the right person. Well, I found the right person,
Oh, great.
and she's an energy healer, and I worked with her, that was like my full-time job. And then out of it, I'm now helping others with that. So for those of you who are not very sensitive, but you really, well, we kind of really are, but maybe you're not that in touch with it,
Right.
you're an artist. I know that you understand what it feels like. I know there's been at least one time that you've felt connected to, in the zone, let's just say, right? Like where you're like, oh, I'm going to paint this thing. And then maybe when you're done, your doubt comes in, your mind comes in and says, this is awful. Nobody's going to like this. And then you either throw it away or you end up like putting it out there, but it's just so hard because you have all this fear and doubt and insecurity and all that stuff. Well, you got to work through that. I mean, that's like you might need help with that. And then I just recommend, continuing to meditate, create a space for yourself that is quiet. If you're not somebody who can meditate, then make tea for yourself, not a glass of wine, tea. And sit. If it, there's got to be something that you love. Think about, what is my favorite room in the house or in the apartment?
Yeah.
Where can I get some privacy? Maybe it's a corner in your bedroom where you have a chair and you have a bookshelf and you have a salt lamp and you have a statue of something. Maybe you have a beautiful piece of art. Create that for yourself. And maybe in that chair you draw. Maybe
It's
you're
fun.
just
I think part of the problem for me with the COVID is I do like my silent, I like my quiet time, and I have my family here. They're here all the time.
yeah
And my son is home from school, and you like you talk about, where do I go? Where can I go?
Where
And
can
the
I
other day I was
go?
like, dear God, where do I go to be alone? You
Isn't that
go,
hilarious?
it's like, this is driving me crazy. And I think a lot of us are relating to that, and we have two sides of the coin. I have some people who live alone and they're telling me how desperately alone they are. And then you
Right.
have us that have some partial families or some family around us. And we're going, oh my
Yeah.
God, I love this person.
This is too much.
But this is a little bit much. I said, through sickness and whatever, but this is too much. And so I do think that quiet space and that grounding, and this, the second time you brought that up, and I mentioned it also in my book, is that it's okay to make sort of a little altar, making a space for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe that means, sitting with your animal too. Like if you're
Oh,
alone and lonely, maybe you have a dog or a cat, and you just sit with them and be there and just work on your art, do what you can do it's actually quite nurturing to do this.
yeah.
It's really amazing. And you know what? It will take time, like anything, like changing any behavior, right? Like if your nervous system is like, zzz,
Mm-hmm.
get out in nature, make it a routine, just put it as a priority, and then come back and just give yourself 30 minutes. Just, okay, I'm going to drink tea. I'm not going to watch the news. I'm going to listen to
Oh,
music. I can read something. I can put on the fire. I mean, there's lots of things, candles, if you don't have a fireplace, what nurtures you, and then bring your art into that. And then you'll get there. You'll get into that space, right? Don't you think, Chris?
I definitely think so. I think that I love that. What nurtures you, focus on what nurtures you when you're doing your art. And I do relate to what you're saying. And I think we all have had really dark periods in our lives. And I was always criticized in my family for being overly emotional, overly sensitive. I mean, I heard that all my life. And so turning it around to realizing, well, this is actually an advantage. Being sensitive can be an advantage. And if you learn the tools,
Yes. You have to have the tools, right?
Yeah. And you put the
Yeah.
tools in place and you're like, okay, as long I can manage this and moderate it and I can create
Yes.
quiet space. But when we do focus on something, like you're talking about, when you focus on a weave and you're in that, it's like it's meditation.
Absolutely. Oh, it's such meditation. It's amazing. Truly it is. And it's interesting because when I was learning the craft, there were certain stitches that I was drawn to and certain stitches I wasn't drawn to. And I would learn them and I would go, no. And I was sort of pushing myself because all the other weavers I saw on Instagram were doing this stitch or this technique. And I was like,
There's
but
that all
I
the
don't like
other.
it. And then there's this thing like it has to be like so complex or something technically, or there's this idea that the story in Storyville, that's what I like to call it, that we have to have that. And once I let that go, it was like, oh, and then once in a while I like to learn a new stitch or something, and then I'm like drawn to that, and I'm like, okay, okay. Well, yeah. So it's about the intuitive process and the
Right.
colors and what flows in, and then it just kind of translates. And it's not so much about technique, although of course you do have to learn you do have to learn some kind of technique with your
Right.
art, because otherwise you
Right.
can't really do it. But learn techniques that you're curious about, that inspire you. Follow
Well,
people that
follow
inspire
that
you.
intuition.
Yeah.
Like you just
Yeah.
said, you once again, you spoke about looking at someone else's. You really, it's about what resonates with you and listening to that. And I do believe that if there's also a big step in there that we're not discussing, which is withholding your judgment. You know,
Oh,
we
yeah. Oh,
withholding your criticism. What does this look like? Oh my God! Because my
it's so
mind.
awful. Nobody's gonna like it. I can't
Uh,
even show
I
it.
said, look at these colors. What am I? You have to turn that off.
Off. You do.
And you feel and you just feel, and it's amazing how when that happens and you just get to a place where you're like, wow. And sometimes I find, I don't know about you, I put it down, I don't know how I feel about it, and then i
Yeah.
come
Oh,
i come
yeah.
back to it, and a week later I'll go, wow, who who did
Who
that?
did that? Yeah.
I know. It's like, where did that come from?
Totally. Oh, yes. And you have to put it away. It's like hard sometimes. You're like saturated. You're like, uh,
Yeah.
you want that dopamine hit of like finishing it, right? And then you're like, no,
No.
no,
No.
your heart, your heart has to step in and go, no, little fill in the blank with your name. No, little Cheryl, you got to stop, and we're going to just like do other things. And then we're going to come back tomorrow or in a week or whatever. And then you're right. It's like, ooh, you kind of do need that space.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
you, because it's created, I would like to say you're creating in spirit. And so you have to be in spirit to, sometimes you have to be in spirit to see the beauty of it. And then in
Right.
time, that's, I know that seems weird, but when you're in a certain place, you can see the beauty
Yeah.
of it, because
Yeah.
you're not in your man mind or whatever, and your
Right.
humanness. And you
Yeah.
come back and you go, wow, wow. And
Yeah.
that's what I call co-creating. You are co-creating with
Yeah.
divinity there. And,
Yeah.
so, and I would encourage listeners, don't destroy it, but right before you get to that, right, tearing it up or painting over it, sometimes it's good to just flip it to the wall or walk away.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, it was like really cathartic, but that was the first time I've ever done that, honestly. And it
Yeah.
felt great. It was perfect.
Hey,
Yeah.
listen, I have stories. I used to, when I was young, my cousin, if she listens to this, will laugh about it, but I would bake a lot. And she remembers one time walking in the kitchen where I had my hands in the middle of the cake and I was just destroying it because it was too dry, dang it. And I couldn't get the icing on. And I just got so mad that I was like ripping.
I love it.
She walked into the kitchen. She's like, what are you doing?
Are you
So
okay?
we all have those, those dark
Yeah.
moments.
Yeah.
And
It's
it's,
all,
and
and that is okay. That is totally okay.
yeah, it's okay.
Yeah.
And you just release that, once again, releasing your judgment, and don't be mad at yourself if you do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's all good. It's all
It's all
good.
good. It's all good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, I love this conversation. I love talking to you. I love the guidance. I didn't realize there were people that would help empaths. I know I have a friend that just recently told me she is a highly sensitive individual, and it's a term that I wasn't familiar with. And
Yeah. Now, there's
And
a
I think
book. There's several books.
so I
Yeah, just look
encourage
it up.
people, if you feel that way, don't feel alone. People should not feel alone. There are other people like you, and there's obviously books about it. I think that's
Yes.
wonderful to know.
Yeah,
And I
it
don't know if
really
you're
is.
up for them calling you Cheryl if they need mentorship, but
Oh, yeah. I have a website for my energy healing that I just launched not too long ago. It's called neshamaenergyhealing.com.
okay.
Neshama is Neshama, and it's the Hebrew word for soul or spirit. So neshamaenergyhealing.com. You can we're actually get help there
Oh,
from me
wow.
if it resonates. No pressure.
Right.
Just get help. I mean, just get support. This is a time when we all need that extra support, especially as sensitives and empaths. Wow, really. So
I
thank
think
you for
that's
having
wonderful.
me
Oh, you're
here.
welcome. I think that's wonderful that you do
Yeah.
you do so much work. You know that you're not only are you doing creative work, but you're doing work, spiritual work, and
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
helping people find their way. I encourage people to follow that website. I'll put it in your bio too because
Okay. Okay.
I think that's fantastic, and they can see your beautiful work online at your basic website. They can read about where
Yes.
you get these ethical fibers. I think that's
Yep.
fascinating.
Hmm.
Fascinating. And like I said, it's a step that I never even considered taking into my work, you
I'm
know.
glad that I'm helping people understand that because it's important that we keep things clean and beautiful and kind and compassionate. And these industries are often not compassionate. And so, yeah, if you follow me on Instagram, I just I put it all out there. I link to all the sources where I
Oh,
get the
great.
fibers. I show pictures and videos, and so it's a good resource. It's at the Enchanted Weave. So
Great.
yeah, and send
Because
me a
we are.
DM and say hi.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
wonderful. Well, thank you. Thank you for
Thanks,
joining me.
Chris.
And this is a great conversation. So I enjoyed it. Talk to you
Me
soon.
too. Talk to you soon.
Thanks again for listening to the Spiritual Artist Podcast. Whether you're watching this show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, or iHeartRadio, make sure you choose the subscribe button so that you will receive updates when new segments are released. Most importantly, be still, listen, and know that you are a spiritual artist.